Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kāka, ka tangi hoki ahu. Ti hei mauri ora. I reri kaua tu taku reo me miki te runga ki te matua o te whenua o tēnei rohi, ko te tauihu o te waka Māui. Me mihi ki a koutou ngā kaipupuri mana whenua, koutou anō hoki ko ngā taonga whenua, taonga moana o te tauihu. Ka huri taku aro ki a koutou e whakarauhia nei o koutou ake pūkenga, o koutou mātauronga, me o koutou kaha ki te kaupapa nei, ka mihi. Nau mai rā ki tēnei wānanga kōrero hei whakapuake i te āhuatanga o ngā toi ki whakatū. Kei ngā kai kōrero mō tēnei rangi, kei te mihi atu, e tika ana kia mihi ake ki te ihi, te tapu me te wana o te kaupapa. I ai ki ngā kupu kōrero, a kui, koromā, he toi whakairo, he mana tangata. I nā hoki te mea kia whakanikoniko ngā mahi toi e ngā tuakiritanga o te hāpori. Hei anō tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Me inui tātou, tēnei te ara kei runga, ko te ara o tēnei tūpuna, ko te ara o tēnei āriki, ko te ara o tēnei matua a iwi, ko te ara o rangi nui e tū nei, o papatua nuku e takoto nei. Kia rarau iho rā ngā tapu wai o tānei, tēnei te pō, nau mai te ao. Kia ora everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this virtual Wānanga session. For some of you who may have joined Ali and I last week when we kicked off this virtual Wānanga series as part of this phase of engagement leading to the development of a new arts and creativity strategy for Whakatū Nelson. And this phase we're calling Waihanga Whakatū, or Create Nelson, because really what we're leaning into at the moment is revealing the strengths and what's possible for the arts here, arts and creativity here in Whakatū, but also the wider Te Tauihu. And so as part of that process, we want to have these virtual Wānanga sessions with you as community members, people who are representative of the arts, but also, as is the case this evening, learning from our neighbours, learning from places around the motu who can share their stories and insights and showcase some of the work that they've been involved in to help inspire us around what's possible here in Nelson as we embark on this journey to develop our arts and creativity strategy. So we're really stoked to have you with us this evening as part of this virtual Wānanga. If you're joining us via Zoom or via Facebook, you're able to submit questions. We have two panelist presentations with us tonight, and I'll introduce both of our guests shortly. And you're able to submit those questions through or comments for discussion, and we'll get those through afterwards, and we'll have a facilitated Q&A. But first, we'll have a couple of presentations from our esteemed manuhiri from Ōtautahi. So I'd like to introduce both of our guests tonight. So first up, we'll have Kiri Jarden. Kiri is of Ngāi Tahu Rangitane Ngāti Toa Rangatira descent, and she's worked in art strategy, management and planning, and events for over 20 years in both Rotorua and Ōtautahi Christchurch. She is currently the Principal Arts Advisor at Christchurch City Council. A Winston Churchill Memorial Trust Fellow, Kiri researched public arts planning and delivery in England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. Kiri is also an artist and chair of the Paimanu Charitable Trust, supporting Ngāi Tahu contemporary visual artists and arts projects. So we're very, very pleased to have you on the call. Nau mai, Kiri, thank you for joining us. Tēnā koe. And next up, we have Mike Fisher. So Mike's is passionate about unleashing the arts and creative sector to create great places. So his theme is going to be all about placemaking tonight. Throughout Mike's career, he's worked in many placemaking pioneers in the sector who have inspired communities to engage differently with the spaces around them and have catalysed economic development in towns and cities. Mike has worked in this space for over 22 years in placemaking, strategic planning and urban regeneration projects across Australia, New Zealand and the United Kingdom. He is the City and Place Transformation Manager at ChristchurchNZ and also runs his consultancy Urban Tacticians. So we're really, really pleased to have you with us here, Mike. Nau mai, tēnā koe. Thank you for joining us. So the format for this evening is really, really simple. We're going to have a presentation and sharing some insights from both Kiri and Mike. Kiri will go up first and then we'll hand over to Mike, during which time we'll be collecting questions and having a think about how this might apply to us here in Whakatū and how it can help inform our strategy journey. Feel free to flick those questions in at any point and we'll get into our panelists afterwards. And then the four of us will have a good old wānanga afterwards about how we might be able to take some of those learnings on board as we embark on this journey ourselves and how we can work together as part of that process. So that's all from me, and I'm going to hand it straight over to Kiri. Kia ora, Kiri.
Kia ora, and thank you, Johnny. He uri hau no Naitahu, no Ngāti Tō Rangatira no Rangitāne ahau. He ka hapai toi apurei, I te kaunihira o Ōtautahi. I'm the Principal Arts Advisor at Christchurch City Council, as Johnny's indicated. I've been here for nearly 10 years in the role, having moved back after the earthquakes from Rotorua, where I was in a similar but different role for roughly 10 years or so. So here to talk a little bit about our art strategy. Toi Ōtautahi is the name of the strategy, and actually if you're taking notes, Google later, toiōtautahi.org.nz will give you some indicator of the sort of work that we've got underway and some of our aspirations for our local arts sector and city as well. So it's also the name of our art strategy, and it's a partnership strategy that is one we worked on with support from Creative New Zealand, Rata Foundation, and more latterly we've brought in Manatū Taonga as a partner as well. Obviously those partners are funding partners. We also work with mana whenua, and in developing the strategy, lots of engagement and work with the sector and with the community, and lots of ways for sector and community to engage as we develop the strategy. I guess what we wanted from it was a plan of ways to invest in the arts. The previous strategy was last adopted by Council, and it was Council alone in 2001. So quite a time lag. And I would say that that strategy did what most strategies do. It set out that arts was good, that supporting the arts was good for the community, good for the artists, and good for the economy, things like that. And it had lots of graphs and charts. Perhaps what it did lack was action sort of focus. You know, the thing that people say when you're developing strategies, and that was the same in Rotorua as will be in Christchurch and anywhere I imagine, is particularly from the sector, is so what? What are you going to do? What's this going to mean? Is it going to be some words on a bit of paper that sit on a shelf and, you know, don't do anything? And that certainly wasn't our interest, certainly wasn't my interest. You know, want to do stuff and you want to make a difference in the job that you're in. And when you work in the arts, you tend to stay working in the arts and you're quite passionate about the arts and achieving outcomes for the sector, which we know are good for the community and good for the city in lots of other ways, lots of those other benefits, including economic. The environmental one, I guess, is one we're getting our head around, but lots of advantages for the community. And I'm just, one of our vision, our key vision for the strategy was to be known as New Zealand's best place to live and create, where the arts activate Ōtautahi Christchurch and creative exploration defines who we are. So here we're giving a bit of a nod to our forebears, going right back to Ngaitahu and Waitaha and Ngāti Māmoe, and the art making that went on there, and that is sort of famous throughout our rohi down here, the rock art and things like that, alongside all the other art forms that were practiced, and right through to the group and the work of those artists that belong in that space, to the formation of Catalyst and Caxton Print and the poets and the writers. So, you know, we really wanted to celebrate that history, and not just that we had great artists, but they actually were challenging status quo, that they were out there taking risks, taking punt. And so that sort of sits in there as a principle of a strategy as well, that we wanted to be audacious alongside wanting to collaborate and be inclusive and a bunch of other stuff. We wanted to make sure that the strategy wasn't us playing safe all the time, that we took some risks and pushed it out. And so we adopted or endorsed the strategy, and the partners did also, late in 2019. So it meant that our sort of kicking into gear was early in 2020, and then we got COVID. So it did slow things down, as it did for any other organisation, but it was a chance to sort of step back and say, well, what does it mean? What are we going to do? How are we going to resource this? So there was a bit more time for planning. And so we set about drafting a 3-year implementation plan. And it's one that we ended up taking to Manatū Taonga and their new funding as well, and we secured some funding there because in the end, the work that we can do to support the community is dependent on the resources we've got. And so making sure it was an action-oriented strategy and that we had some resource, I think those were the key things for the strategy, and to make sure we had some legs, and that as we're ramping up activity this year, that we've got some buy-in from the sector, that they're joining the momentum, that they're feeling part of it, that we're achieving the things that they wanted us to achieve through the strategy, and that was things like resourcing, mentoring and residency. So we're just kicking off mentoring programs that we launched in December with a screen incubator, for instance. And that's clearly focused on two outcomes. One is more of our own stories, celebrating our identity here in Ōtautahi, Canterbury, more widely, and work for the sector locally. And so that's the aspiration, setting out with that kind of a program, and we're rolling those out for music, and we'll be doing that for performing arts as well. We're also working on things that address some of those big losses through the earthquakes. So just straying slightly into Mike's territory, with a significant loss of the central city, went a whole lot of artist studios, galleries, performing arts venues. So work through the rebuild program. You know, we're at year 11 now, sees new theatres, either such as the restoration of the town hall, and new theatres being planned. Court Theatre having broken ground more recently, Isaac Theatre Royal and the Piano having been built, those private not-for-profit trusts, rebuilding those facilities. We've got dance studios coming on board as part of Parakiori, the the Metro Art Space, and the YMCA will be building Black Box Theatre and dance studios as well. So we've got those sort of bigger infrastructure projects are coming along, and they're sort of flowing through, in the later part of the rebuild projects. Public art has been a big part of the rebuild of the city, with Ngāi Tahu at the table. A strong component of that public art has been Ngāi Tahu stories and been Ngāi Tahu led. Running, I guess, alongside that, councils continue to commission public art work as well, and the strategy does support that, although I will note that we do have a separate public art strategy that does need revamping. That's an operational strategy, whereas the art strategy is much more outward facing and about collaboration and partnership, and delivering on those things that the sector and community wanted. So for the strategy, there was an acknowledgement that the arts underpin innovation and boost economy, that they make city centres attractive, dynamic spaces for residents, and great places to visit for those travelling. That's been domestic more latterly, obviously, but hopefully to international tourists. So we're spending time investing in making sure that the strategy influences some of our events, for instance. So with a focus on Ngātaui Māori, that we, and an interest in Matariki, the lighting festival has been transformed into an event called Tira Mamai. And we had a sort of soft launch of that last year, and we're planning like everything's going ahead unimpeded this year. We're really looking forward to it. We're bringing along Māori designers and innovators, as well as tech companies and artists, to help us create displays that will sort of illuminate at Matariki. And attracting innovative talent. So one of the things, I alluded to before, was that studios were lost. And that's still a thing that artists will talk about, particularly visual artists will talk about. So we've been working on securing a central city space for artists to use as a studio that will complement a couple of other not-for-profits working in that space as well. Because we know that where you've got a cluster of activity, of creative activity, you've got added vibrancy and other things that flow from that. And so we're really excited. I can't tell you much more about that just yet, but we're just about there confirming it all, which is quite exciting. Yeah, the collaborations and the partnerships. So I guess that's the thing that we're focused on as well. We can't do it alone. When I keep saying we, as the arts team at council, there are two full-time staff members, and we've got a contractor in. So obviously our relationships across council with our urban regeneration team, which we'll probably talk a little bit more about. We've worked extensively with that team in the past. We're part of the events and arts team. So we collaborate a lot with our colleagues in that space as well. And then we look external. So in terms of mana whenua, we take mana whenua advice, both into delivery of the strategy, but also on individual projects. And so we seek out opinion and feedback on what we're doing, just to make sure that we are having the impact that we need to, that we're doing it well. And that more people involved, more people coming along, I guess, and supporting the programs and the projects that we're rolling out as well. So what more can I tell you about the strategy? So we've got mentoring residencies underway. We've launched the website. We late 2020 an arts newsletter. We've fired up our social media platforms just ahead of launching the website, so we can start generating interest. With COVID, it wasn't a big party to launch this stuff, but it went out quietly, but we're monitoring and building some traction there, which is great. So we're continuing to commission public artwork in the central city and in the suburban centres. That covers anything from sculpture to murals, any variety of artworks. And we've just started benchmarking, where we are in the arts. So we've got the general surveys that the likes of Creative New Zealand undertake periodically. And then we're starting to build our own picture of what does the arts economy look like in the city, and we'll check in and see where the progress is. We need to know that we're making a difference somewhere along the way, but fingers crossed, not too many more disruptions for the sector and for implementation of the strategy. But I'll wind up there, and happy to answer questions if they come up.
Awesome. E mihi ane ki a koe, Kiri. Thank you so much for that. That's it's a really, really awesome start. And I've been reflecting, listening there. I mean, I think that your strategy document is a stunning document. It's very inspiring from our perspective. But I think for me, what excites me is that as a visitor to Ōtautahi, the changes that you see every time we go in terms of that revitalisation, the visibility of art in your city centre has just been incredible. And I was just down maybe a few weeks ago now, and not too long ago, and it was really quite noticeable. But also for us, I think we mentioned to you before this call that we also have some big capital projects on the go here for the first time in a generation, really, for Nelson. And one of those is the library. And so it was awesome to be able to have that experience of arts, and of course your beautiful library as well, and how those spaces connect and celebrate identity and place through that too. So super inspiring stuff. Thank you for sharing so generously with us. I'm looking forward to the korero afterwards. Hand over to you now, Mike, and I think you're going to share screen, aren't you?
Yeah, that is the plan. Kia ora koutou. So I'll just get a little presentation up if I can. And it's always nice to hear Kiri's voice. Thanks, Kiri, for doing the start. I'm just going to go up for a second and start on the big ball we're all in, I suppose, because as I was reflecting on this, thinking about artists and creatives, particularly in the issues and the things that we're grappling with today, the big things, I suppose, out of the earthquakes, but particularly in Christchurch, seeing the way our artists here and our creative people really looked at the issues, looked at the problems that we had in a completely different way was really inspiring to me. And I think we're grappling with a lot, and there's a lot going on, and for our globe, but there's also that a lot in our places, and I've found that artists and creators are able to really break down things and look at a different way. And I just wanted to start at this level and think, right, well, how do we take it into this places, the things we're trying to create in our cities for our communities. And I know, like in Christchurch, we went through a lot, as Kiri said, this was 11 years ago, and it was pretty crazy time, a lot of tragedy and destruction. But I think it was the artists that really sort of gave us that early grounding, and we're able to be nimble and resilient and get stuff going. And this was Festa. This was an early festival not long after the quakes, and it was pretty crazy and wacky, and thousands of people came into town. And it was put on with some local creatives and inviting students, art and design students, to come and rethink what the city centre could be, and they just took it over. And again, they sort of inspired us to think, actually, we can rebuild here. That at the time where there was a lot of loss and tragedy, and the feeling was, should we do it? What are we doing? Where's the money? But there was that sense of, actually, people will come back and people will engage. And it was these young creatives and artists who were able to show us that way and started to showing us that path. And then we've had, as Kiri said, there's been amazing projects. This is a dance-o-mat. Some of you might know Gap Fillers, one of Gap Fillers' projects, bringing back propositioning dance as a public, in public space. You put your couple of bucks in and you can plug in and dance with a mirror ball and speakers. And I think, again, that loss of facilities, which we're getting back now, as Kiri mentioned, but that early response as to what we've lost and how do we recreate that and what can we do without infrastructure. And then rethinking and really helping us to grapple with the tragedy. This is 185 chairs, which I think is probably the most poignant memorial that we have. And every time I go past, it's that thing that artists make you laugh and make you cry, And I think this has been a really incredible touch point for the city that has moved around, but has grown. And particularly my boys, who have grown up as earthquake kids, I suppose, have been to this and have seen this as a really powerful memorial and reminder of those lives that we lost. And then I think sort of rethinking infrastructure. This is a project an artist and a designer did to bring a cinema back on a trailer. We lost cinemas. We didn't have anything in the central city. And as a team, when I worked at the council after the earthquakes and the regen team and supporting this project to think, right, we can bring back a cinema, a 2-person cinema. You sit inside and actually what is the way we can do infrastructure that's light touch and then enables people to re-engage with places and it actually gets them to think differently about what can be created. To now, as Kiri mentioned, I think a reforming of our city identity. I think the work with Ngāi Tahu, which Kiri's doing a lot with, is reforming our city as a bicultural city. When I moved to Christchurch 15 years ago, I came from the North Island, and it was always seen as the most English of cities and fairly conservative. And I think now we've got the programs that Kiri's mentioned, and that creativity that just was unleashed and just came out after the quakes that has reborn, and helped us rethink our identity. And then these programs like Scape, this is an amazing piece, I think, in one of our new public parks in the city, really landing the public art and creativity right in the heart of the city, where probably I think was there previously, but wasn't something that was at the surface, and that creative people were sort of almost underground a wee bit. And then a project I'd been involved in, I just finished up at Riverside a little while ago, and again, these public-private partnerships, so looking at things differently, so taking a blank wall and giving those artists the space to rethink how you look at a place and what it can be. And I think this is a neat mural because it's 3D and it's done something crazy with the buildings, but it's also been about that identity and that sort of that new Christchurch that's coming out, I suppose, and rethinking what we can be. And then Kiri mentioned, I think, the partnership with Ngāi Tahu, and I love this piece where my boys had played. They're getting a little bit old for the playground now, they say, but we still go from time to time. And this is Priscilla Cowie's work in Margaret Mahy Playground, which is through Matapopuri Charitable Trust, and that the stories that are being told in our public space and infrastructure through some amazing Māori artists, locals, and people who really can engage differently and rethink. And this is an amazing playground, but it actually tells these stories of the place, what's underneath, what's come before, and where are we going next. And I think that sort of thing for the city has been really incredible. And then I just wanted to, just a couple of minutes on a bit of a challenge, I suppose, for a strategy and where we go as city. And my background's planning, and sort of, for most cases, you might engage artists down the back end of a project. You have a space, you have something you're thinking of, and you want to engage them to think about it. And I want to sort of talk about a couple of projects from Adelaide, and when I was there, we started doing a little bit like we've got in Christchurch, where we have spaces. This is an arcade, and in this case we just handed over to some artists and some creatives and said, look, take it over, find the businesses, see what you can do. And they transformed this little shopping arcade into something quite different, and that was engaging them much more early on in the process and saying, well, it's yours. And then we were looking at some street, and sort of part of where the University of South Australia is now growing in the West End of Adelaide. And we said, what have we got the artists involved in the actual briefing of projects? No, not halfway through or towards the end, we've got a space and we want a piece of public art or whatever. What if they were at the start briefing up the consultants' briefs for engineers? So this was a workshop we ran with some artists and engineers and traffic people and planners through the council about the West End. And it was the most amazing, wacky, awesome workshop about how do we brief and what is the vision that we want to put out to our consultants. And I think it's probably for me, the next frontier of having seen what was possible in the response in the quakes in Christchurch, to where do we go in our cities and towns, and thinking about how do we engage artists and creative people. And actually there's work here, paid work, in that briefing really early on stages of our big capital projects, that they aren't brought in just down the track and given the parameters. They can help set the parameters right early on. So it's just something I was engaged in, and I think that helped us in Adelaide. We then changed a whole lot of policies that had bound up the city. I think has always been fairly conservative, or seemed to be conservative, and a lot of the work we've done with the artists helped us uncover the stuff that was holding us back as a city, or holding Adelaide back. And in one meeting, they got rid of about 240 policies and busking and all sorts of things you couldn't do. But all of that was because the artists and creators were pushing into new places and finding these things that were holding stuff back, and we could go as a council staff and deal with a lot of that. And that then helped grow performance industry in the laundromat. You know, things that you wouldn't normally expect, that make the city a little bit more interesting, a little bit wacky, and you give creatives an opportunity, you know, performance space that might not have been there in a suburban street, you know, in a space that wouldn't normally be expected. So yeah, that challenge to rethink when and how our artists and creative people can be involved in the process, and what that can be, and be free. We don't have to lock it down, and things can go along a flow, and actually we come out with some amazing policy change and things that will make our places quite incredible. So yeah, that was that's what I wanted to share, and thanks for having me. It's great to be able to share with you all.
Thank you. Now, Nikki, that was fantastic from both of you. I feel very enthused now, actually. I know we might have a couple of questions as well. I haven't actually been taking much notice of the questions coming through, but I've certainly got a few. But I would say, first of all, I think it's quite easy to sit here and think you've done that all very easily. But I imagine that there's a whole lot more work in that, because you're presenting something that looks so polished and finished. And I think I totally appreciate the amount of work and angst that can go into actually being successful in those sorts of strategies, particularly around that stakeholder engagement and keeping everybody on track. So thank you for making it look so easy. I know it wasn't. And also, I guess what I was just thinking, and I've got a couple of questions for Kiri, but I was just thinking as you were talking there, Mike, that actually one of the things we need to be really clear about is how this strategy can actually be that matchmaking document between the creative sector and the processes that are currently in place, and the people who are basically behind those large projects, to be that translator essentially, or to get them to hold hands in a way that we get a much better result. And we've talked a little bit about that already, but it was really good to see that validated through what you were just saying, actually. Because I think that's our real opportunity here. And as Johny said, we've got some significant infrastructure projects just about to happen. And while we haven't had the dreadful catastrophe of an earthquake, which actually becomes that moment where creativity does come to the fore, because it's actually the thing that people tend to gravitate towards, we do have an opportunity to build, which is really exciting. So I think we need to make the most of that. Kiri, I just had a couple of questions for you, just from a council perspective. In terms of that internal stakeholder engagement that you must have to do constantly in order to make your team bigger than the 2.5 people that you are, or the 2 people that you are, at what level, if you don't mind telling me, what level does that operate at?
All.
Yeah.
So, you know, in order to get traction, sometimes you have to talk to elected members. You've got to find your champion there, and sometimes they can move things faster than you know you can by by merely persisting to send emails and have conversations with other people in your organisation. So that's one opportunity. Absolutely. Having a champion on the council is quite important. But I'll talk to whomever. Well, I'm not particularly hierarchical, so I'll talk to whomever I need to talk to kind of move things along and to have those conversations. You know, when we're talking specifically about Ngāi Tahu projects, I'll engage with the Ngāi Tahu advisors. Obviously, occasionally people will come to me for advice. If it's appropriate to give it, then I will, otherwise funnel those out. But yeah, I'll work across teams and with anyone that's got a question around how do we do this? How do we make something happen? Who can we work with? Where do we go? Because people will seek recommendations. Yeah.
And do the council, the rest of the sort of team on council, are they very aware of your role within that, or do projects slip by and you realise actually something's happened that you haven't had any influence on, or is it really very much the whole of council?
No, things slip by, and we either find out because something's gone awry. So the commissioning of public artwork is probably the classic there. You know, when things aren't contracted properly, when you're working with copyrighted material, those sorts of things. Yeah, as much as possible, we prefer people to come through to us and have that conversation as early as possible, and then we can give them the steer, or we support them to do the project and work with them, depending how far along. But yeah, in a larger organisation, certainly things do move in ways, and you've got distinct project teams, and you might have contracted project managers, and they don't always know, you know, who's who.
Sure. And the other question I had, and it's something that we also keep coming back to, is how you manage, and it may just be inherent in what you've said actually in terms of the way you operate across all levels, but how do you maintain this across political cycles where political will might change and support might change, and to ensure the longevity of it on a longer term horizon than a 3-year term? Is that something that you sort of overtly built into the strategy?
Well, not necessarily, because, you know, a strategy can sit there and do nothing very much and exist without anyone really thinking about it. And in fact, that's possibly the situation now. What you hope is that you're supporting people to make a difference, and elected members to make decisions, and projects to unroll in a way that they give life to the strategy, even if it's not directly pointing to it. We don't spend a lot of time saying, and that's how we delivered on that thing and X in the strategy. But you hope that the decisions made support delivery of the strategy. Certainly when we're involved, say giving advice on funding, for instance, we will reference the strategy and how or why a project does or doesn't particularly support delivery of the strategy. Outside of cycles, I would say, again, relationships. So relationships are key for all of this, actually, and whatever we're doing, you have to have a good relationship within council, with elected members, with the community in the sector, and with business, because you're going to be working with a whole range of those people, particularly in the arts. So those relationships matter, and they're the things that will carry you along as well, but also achieving some results. So that if there's a recognition that the arts are making a tangible difference to the city, then you're more likely to garner that support, and that support will happen, you know, in an ongoing way, even if it's not specifically talking to the strategy itself. It's the you know, that thing, those words can sit over here, and you keep an eye on them, making sure that they're given effect to, even if that's not how others are articulating or describing that delivery.
Sure, no, that's great. There's a question that's come through from JP, who's said, I think Kiri mentioned environmental issues. I was wondering in what context, and that might be also a question for Mike in terms of the impact of thinking about environmental change through the work that you're doing. Is that something that JP was just wondering of the context of that in relation to the strategy?
Oh yeah, I think my point was, you know, we see the arts impacting all parts of life. How that's working in the environmental sense, I'm not 100% sure that we've got a clear focus on that, other than, you know, when we're hosting events, we work towards a zero waste policy, but that's regardless of the type of event. Council itself produces arts-based events, so zero waste. We're looking at who our contractors are, and I think we've been we're a little bit one-eyed on that front, and that we're celebrating local as much as we can. And I guess in the time of COVID, you know, that's probably what all councils are doing. You're working with who's in your neck of the woods as much as possible. So it's those sorts of things. When we're commissioning artwork, we are starting to think increasingly about the sort of materials that are used. So where's that material come from? What's its lifespan? Those sorts of things, because they make a difference, not just to the environment, but of course to the purse. If they're easy to look after, have a long life, still make a great impact and tell a great story, then that's a great outcome. But not all artworks will, you know, meet high threshold, I suspect.
Sure. Johny, did you have a question? I think.
Mike, do you have anything to add to that one, or
not really. I mean, well, the main thing is thinking about if there is artists and creative people helping to shape the response. I think often that we get the same, myself as a planner, you have a planner and an engineer, and the same old people in the room thinking about what is the problem and then what are the solutions to it. And I think, as Kiri said, you know, those relationships and those networks outside of the usual, those unexpected collaborations are key. And I think that's where I've seen an artist, you know, with their creativity, being able to bring something different, being able to understand the problem in a different way and think about those solutions. And I think that, as in, like, thinking about the big environmental problems we've got, is an opportunity, I think, that we probably haven't really got into. We've just left the same old people thinking about how to respond to it. So maybe there's something in there for all of us, you know, what we do.
Yeah, massive in terms of communicating the challenges and that we're facing in the way it can. And actually, JP, the perfect person to ask that. JP just did a phenomenal TED talk on that on Saturday, actually. Right. Art, photography, and the environment. It's a timely question. I really wanted to pick up. I think you both said it in different ways, but I initially noted it down when you were talking, Kiri, which was you said we didn't want to be safe. I was really interested in that. That's something we're exploring ourselves, looking inwardly at the moment about the safety that's associated with the arts here in Whakatū, and how we navigate that moving forward and sort of bust it open. What's your experience been with that?
Yeah, and that was not an infrequent call from the sector when we were developing the strategy. You know, can we be a bit bold? And I guess it was a message to council not to retreat back to safety or be afraid of making some steps and doing things a bit differently. How are we doing that? I think that's a good question. I guess we're trying to keep that front of mind. So we, you know, this is the one way of doing it, but actually there are other ways we could be investigating, you know, exploring the answers to these things, and a lot of that has come down to the people that we're working with. So I think a lot of it cycles back to the relationships. So who are we talking to? Who's being able to influence and make some decisions, and you know, what's the diversity of voices that are in the room as well sometimes, you know. Yeah, I guess that's one thing we have to, it's a good thing for us to go back and actually say, well, where have we been audacious?
Yeah.
What does that mean, and what does that look like for council, for the sector, and for the other partners to the strategy as well?
And thinking about what you've said there around, that was the call of the community, because I think even in the early part of the strategy, we're hearing the same call, we're very much so. And I'm curious in the development of the strategy and pursuing it, the outcomes associated with it and the investment associated with the strategy. What about the parts of the community who maybe aren't directly connected to the arts or don't naturally gravitate to work like this? Do you get the sense that it's supported right across Christchurch? This is bigger than just the arts community, and how did you bring the rest of your community along with you in that journey, not just the ones who are already committed?
Yeah, and that is a hard one, getting those that aren't necessarily already engaged with the arts. I would say obviously with majority arts sector, we positioned ourselves in libraries and that will have got us a different demographic, both younger and older actually, communities, which is a great thing. We provided opportunities for people to write rather than attend a hui. Back in that long ago, 2019, 18, 17, we weren't going online hosting hui. Although I suspect if we'd been able to, we might have got a few more people and maybe a bit more diversity as well. So as much as possible going to where the people were. So we did run focus groups as well. So we had a mana whenua group, but we also had a couple of different focus groups set up just to test ideas as we were drafting, writing up the strategy. This is what we think we're hearing. This is how we think it translates. We had a working group. So actually the structure for the strategy was probably kind of cool too. So we had a steering group, which was primarily the funders and CNZ, Creative New Zealand in there as advocating as well. Mana whenua at that table. And then we had a working group which was had a paid chair, so slightly independent from any organisation or any interest group. And then we had representatives from a variety of arts organisations just to get the breadth of disciplines or practice and operational. So arts and wellbeing included in that, as well as art form type. And mana whenua sitting at that table as well, so that we had different levels of engagement. And the working party helped us design, I guess, the engagement. And I know there was more than one occasion where our engagement advisor was totally freaking out about the amount of conversations we were having with the community. So we did heaps, and it took over a year for us to get around and talk to everyone and say, well, it was a bit long, but it was good. Travelling out to Akaroa, which is about an hour from the city, and out to Little River, and so taking ourselves out into some of the smaller communities in the Banks Peninsula as well, which was quite important, and into Littleton and some other suburbs, just to make sure we were hearing from as many people as possible. The thing about post-quake is that it took a long time for people to start coming back into the city, central city, and you still would hear people even before 2019 say that they hadn't been back into the city since the earthquakes, because they got used to living where they were. It's interesting to see what impact COVID will have. I think we're going to have to do a bit more work bringing people in, but it does impact who will engage if you just focus on the conversation in the central city. So going to where the people are matters.
I might just jump into one of the things, a little Adelaide story. I didn't put it in, but thinking about engagement, where the artist engaged on our behalf, and so we're hard to reach group for us was office workers and sort of people in offices around parts of the city where 9 to 5 come in and out, and everyone would say, well, we never hear from these people who use spaces and use the city, and we want them to be part of this. And the artists came up, we use performance artists, these guys dressed up as aliens and landed in offices, and and it was really fascinating how, again, we looked at the problem as we would normally do as through a council lens, and the different groups, and they thought about it completely differently, and thought actually if we propose to be aliens and just land here and start to engage with them as to you know, show us around and talk about your city and what do you love and where are the creative places, you know. And again, it opened their eyes to those things that we hadn't even thought of. And it was a really fascinating little experiment, and we just engaged them and paid them, and it went really, really well.
I think that's lovely. And I think one of the things that's the great thing about probably being able to develop an art strategy is you can use it to exemplify how the arts can actually operate. That's our hope as well, in some, not to that extent probably, but I think just being able to activate it through the creative people in Nelson in order to be able to engage. I did just want to also ask, and I don't know, I think it was Kiri, or it may have been you, Mike, who mentioned the fact that the economic lever was quite a big lever to pull in terms of people understanding the economic impact of the arts sector for the city. And that's something we're grappling with here, is being able to get anything that's really quantifiable. And obviously it's, you know, some work we need to do. But do you think in the scheme of it, was that quite an important aspect of what the strategy could deliver, was that economic return for the city?
Not specifically. It was just acknowledged that that's an outcome. I think there's probably been quite a bit of research done across New Zealand at various points in time looking at the economic value of the arts, and actually events often sort of feature in that, because post big events there's usually some kind of evaluation of who was attending, how many nights do they stay in a place, how much money did they spend, and so they do provide us with some data around the value of the arts to a city. There are other things, I guess, other measures that we'll start looking for as we've rebuilt, and as things start to open up again, and I guess, you know, barring the blip of the last couple of years, for Christchurch we're in a bit of a unique position because we've had this sort of long period of doing things a little bit differently. That doesn't mean we didn't have big arts events and programs go ahead that would have made an impact and a difference for the city. Other than that, it's the requests from Central City, and Michael probably knows some of this as well, to increase activity in the Central City, to bring more people in, and I imagine that call will perhaps come a little stronger once things start opening up again, that they'll want more activity and activation, more reasons for people to travel into the Central City. I think will become important, and then we'll look at the individual sort of certain suburbs and outlying areas, and how we activate those as well.
And I think the quantify, I mean, it's not quantifying necessarily, but the support from probably some of the private sector, particularly in our Central City and a couple of districts. We have the Salt District, where they've, so landlords, businesses, some developers have got together and are creating, or have created, or are continue creating the identity for this part of the city. And the arts, creative industries are a key part of that. So they've understood quite clearly and seen the impact on their own business and what it does, not just for foot traffic. The landlords see the property values, you know, there's all of that sort of stuff, and that's become probably the identity for this one particular district, and it's become part of what they're known for, and the events, the things that they do, the things that they're investing in, which is sort of a telltale sign that they see the real value, you know, an economic value in investing in it, and investing alongside the public sector in more of it. So it's been a really good sort of little case study here.
I think alongside that is another developer who's given space to a theatre group gratis for a number of years, just to bring punters into the hospitality that fills the rest of his spaces in that same area, and for the same reason. They understand the arts generates activity, brings people in, and that's got to be good for other businesses as well. So there is, you know, it's a fairly straightforward, if not quantified, equation.
Yeah, great that it's understood, I think, isn't it? Because then, as you say, it encourages that private sector investment into it as well. I was really intrigued, actually, Mike, when you showed the outside dance studio, for two reasons. One, I just suddenly thought, actually, that's just like having a basketball court, you know, somewhere where people can go and have that same infrastructure, but from an arts perspective. And also the fact that because of COVID, we're not using venues in the same way. So while we physically haven't lost them, they haven't been in use. So it's quite interesting to see those opportunities and thinking about how we can actually create the space for things to happen outside of venues as well.
Yeah, and I think in that case, they also proposition Gap Filler. I'm told no one dances in Christchurch in public. It's too conservative. I'm sure it's quite different in Nelson, but it was really interesting. So they propositioned, they put that out there and said, look, we can do it. And I think they average 6 to 8 hours of use a day on the thing, and they're having to rebuild it. They're raising money at the moment. You can give money to them to help rebuild it somewhere else in the city. So it's really demonstrated not just the need for things, but the opportunity for things as well. And they came up with that the idea will be something different in Nelson probably, but it'll be those people that are thinking about what's lost or what the opportunity is, that you wouldn't even really you've even thought of. It's come completely out of the blue.
And I can validate your economic return, because on our last, which was meant to be a fleeting trip to Christchurch, by the time we had been into the awesome cafe actually down the bottom of your library and spent some time in Tūranga, isn't it? Tūranga, is it? Yeah, it's in that beautiful building, and done some work out of there and really enjoyed connecting with that space, and walked out and saw the dancing as well. And it was just, the city was completely different to how I remember it. It was like a very, very different energy and vibe there that was extremely attractive, and we stayed longer. So there you go, there's your economic return. We decided to stay an extra night to explore it more, because it was that impressive. And I'm amazed every time that there's clearly that momentum now behind the arts there, because every time I go I see a little bit more. Kiri, can I just clarify, I think you mentioned a lot of collaboration and partnerships. Did your partners, thinking about Mana Whenua but also ChristchurchNZ and others, did they all sign the strategy as well? Did you mention that?
Well, the words used was endorsed rather than adopted, but each of the organisations, so your ChristchurchNZ, Creative New Zealand, Rata Foundation, Mana Whenua was sort of slightly different. It was just having a seat at the table, but those organisations, yes, did endorse the strategy.
Awesome. It's good for us to think about as well. And my last question is thinking about our big capital projects. So we have a library project coming on board, but we also have a very big hospital build as well, and a whole science and technology precinct going in Nelson that's going to house 1,000 knowledge workers. So we've got some seriously big capital projects coming up, which is new territory for Nelson at this scale. Certainly for my generation, we haven't seen development like that in the city. Mike, I was really interested for you to expand on this idea of artists being involved at the beginning of the brief, because we're at the beginning of the brief for a lot of those projects. So have you seen that picked up elsewhere? I think that was an Adelaide example, right? But have you seen it taken up elsewhere, and what have you learned from it?
Yeah, every now and again I've seen it. There was a little bit in Perth I saw, but I've learned, obviously, and I've sort of, I suppose it, but learned particularly after the quakes that artists and creative people really think about experience, and often a planner and a building designer and architect will be thinking about a function, making sure that we have a functional space and it works well, which we obviously need. But having the artist there at the beginning, particularly those that street and the laneway network, the stuff we talked about in Adelaide, where they're thinking about experience. What is it like for people when they arrive there, when they enter that place? And I think that was that, all of a sudden it opened everyone's eyes at the workshop, saying, oh, at the moment we're just thinking about have we got the right road width, have we got the right lighting, is the paving the right color, whatever it is. And I think the experience, and that's what placemaking is, thinking about that experience that for the human being and getting them engaged in it. And that right at the beginning was critical, I think, became critical to those projects. And I think I've only seen it in bits and pieces, but I'm trying to spread the word, I think, or the opportunity, because not just for that, but it also provides paid opportunities in those early big capital projects for artists, not just down the track where you've got the parameters, but as I said, you're helping to set the parameters and you're paid as part of the team developing the briefs and developing the vision for these things. And I think it's probably a new frontier, but it's some I've seen in places, and there's a little bit in Europe every now and again I see crop up in a journal or an article online or something, but not as a movement, but maybe a challenge for Nelson and some of the big projects, because those are the things that you really think actually could help really generate a new experience you wouldn't have even thought about. Your architects and others wouldn't have even dreamed of yet. So
I'll just jump in there. My experience of public art policies is that most have written in there somewhere, get artists involved early. But what is early? You know, and that's the part that seems hardest to do, actually. Get the artist and to have those early conversations. So if you were really at that starting point of the brief for the project, that would be pretty exciting. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, I could talk about this all evening, and we just reflecting on the engagement journey and some of the creative ideas that you brought into the development of the strategy. And the only reason both of our faces kind of got a bit twisted while you were talking, Kiri, is because we've only got a few months, and we're just as ambitious, I think, and so we just kind of panicked a bit. But I think we've recovered now, haven't we? We're all right. We've started our engagement journey over the last couple of weeks, and it was just awesome. We were saying before the call, but just awesome that we had 12 hearty Nelsonians join us in the rain at 7:30 this morning to walk about the city and imagine, reveal and talk about what's there and the stuff we love and loathe, but also imagine what's possible for our city as well. And so we're going to be rolling out more and more engagement opportunities, more walks, and we've got, it was great to hear you talk about allowing people to write as well, because we've created a physical space. So for those of you tuning in, if you want to go and write, we've created a corner at the Nelson eyesite that is completely dedicated to the strategy. There's a desk, a lamp, there's reading material, inspiration there's magazines and books, and there's really nice paper and pencils there, and you can sit and write, and there's a box there to put your thoughts in afterwards. And so if not all great thinking happens behind a screen, and so we want people to, if they want to go back to the analog ways, we've created that physical space. But it's also a great way for us to connect. That's kind of Omicron proof, because we can't all get together in big groups at the moment. Look, we have run out of time, but I really, really want to mihi to both of you for giving up your evening to speak with us, to share your insights, your whakaro, and to inspire us around what's possible, but also the really innovative and exciting approaches that you're taking to elevating arts and creativity in Ōtautahi. We're both really excited by the conversation, and there's lots of comments coming through from people on Facebook who have really enjoyed it as well. So I know that lots of what you've shared today is going to spark all sorts of different conversations for us over the coming weeks and months. And we're looking forward to landing some of those and seeing what's possible. So we'll keep you informed. But for now, I just want to say ngā mihi kia kōrua for your contributions, for your koha this evening, for your time, and for sharing so generously. So thank you to both of you. I'll just close our session with a karakia, but before I do so, for anyone who's joining us, this session will be recorded. We'll make it available via the createnelson.nz website. We'll also be producing summaries of these hui as well for key kind of takeaways and learnings as we go, so we can start publishing some of the insights that we're gathering as we go. And next week we'll be back here at 5 p.m. on Monday, and we've got our councillors there. So Kiri talked about the importance of having advocates around the council table, and we're very, very lucky at Nelson City Council. We've got a working group of 3, Judy and Edgar, Tim Skinner and Pete Rainey, who are right behind this initiative, and the 3 of them will be joining us for a discussion about their thoughts on the strategy and where things are heading for Nelson. So we're really excited about that, and you can register for that through the website as well. But for now, kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawa nui, me ino I tātou. Kia tau ki a tātou katoa te atawhai o tō tātou ariki, a iuhu karaiti me te aroa o te atua, me te whiwhangateitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, 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 āmene.
Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora.